You're not living your life right now. You're living the version of it that exists while you wait for the real one to begin. Maybe you're waiting until the money stabilizes, until the kids are older, until the job gets less insane, the health improves, the relationship finds its rhythm. You've told yourself this is just a difficult stretch, a phase. You're being smart, realistic, patient, but there's something underneath that story you haven't looked at directly. Here's what's actually true. You're not waiting for conditions to improve. You're waiting for permission to finally show up fully in your own life, to take the risks, make the moves, build the things you keep postponing until circumstances cooperate. And the circumstances never quite cooperate. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his life, much of it in physical agony and isolation and poverty, asking one question: what makes a human life genuinely worth living? Not comfortable, not easy, worth living. And what he found was a truth so uncomfortable that most people turn away before it fully lands. Part 1, the illusion that eats your time. The difficulty you're waiting to escape, it isn't coming to an end, not because you've had worse luck than others, but because difficulty is not a phase of human life. It is the structure of it, the texture of it, the permanent condition of being alive. There is no other side, and every day you spend waiting for one is a day of your only existence spent in a waiting room for a door that was never there. Nobody thinks they're postponing their life permanently. From the inside, it feels like strategy. You're being responsible. The right moment is almost here. Nietzsche would call it something else. The fundamental illusion, the belief that your current difficulty is a temporary deviation from a life that is supposed to eventually become manageable, stable, easy. It never flattens out. The terrain just changes. You finish school and discover work brings pressures studying never prepared you for. You build the career and find that success introduces its own cruelties. You find the relationship, and the relationship is beautiful and also requires more of you than you knew you had. You retire and discover the freedom you waited decades for arrives alongside a silence that carries its own weight. This is not pessimism. This is the pattern. Every phase does eventually end. The financial crisis passes, the project finishes, and for a moment you feel like you've arrived, and then the next thing arrives. It always does, which means, the person waiting for life to get easy before living fully is, without knowing it, waiting forever. That realization should feel like something breaking open, because what breaks isn't hope. It's the illusion that was quietly eating your time. And once it breaks, a harder question surfaces. If you've always known somewhere underneath that it was never going to get easier, then what is the waiting actually about? Part 2, the fear behind the excuse. Here's the question nobody wants to sit with. If your circumstances magically resolved tomorrow, the money, the time, the health, the stability, would you actually do what you say you're waiting to do? Be honest, not the answer you'd give out loud, the one you already know. Most people wouldn't. They'd find something else. A new reason the timing still isn't quite right. The obstacle would shift and the waiting would continue, wearing a different explanation, because the problem was never the obstacle. The obstacle was just the most available excuse. Nietzsche understood that the human mind, when it wants to avoid something, is extraordinarily creative at constructing justifications that feel completely reasonable. You don't experience it as fear, you experience it as prudence, wisdom, knowing yourself well enough to wait until you're ready. But underneath the reasonableness, something else is happening. You are afraid of what it means to actually live fully. The risk, the exposure, the possibility of trying and discovering that the life you imagined doesn't materialize, or worse, that it does and it still isn't enough. Full engagement with your own existence is terrifying in a way that waiting is not. Waiting is safe. Nothing can fail while it's still pending. This is what Nietzsche called the cowardice that doesn't know its own name. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that builds a perfectly rational case for postponement and then lives inside that case for years, decades, a whole life sometimes. So the real question isn't, when will conditions be right? The real question is, what exactly are you afraid will happen if you stop waiting and start now. Imperfectly, incompletely, without guarantees. Name it specifically, because until you name it, it runs you without your awareness. The fear is real. Nietzsche never pretended it wasn't, but he made a distinction that changes everything. Between the person who feels fear and retreats into waiting, and the person who feels fear and moves anyway, using the resistance itself as the material they build with. Part 3, What's Suffering, actually does forget what this idea has become. It got turned into a gym slogan. That's not what Nietzsche meant. His argument was structural, not motivational. The people who live with the most depth and genuine presence are not the ones who suffered least. They're the ones who stopped treating suffering as the enemy of a good life and started using it as the substance of one. Think about the art that actually reaches you, not the technically proficient work, the work that lands, that stays with you, that feels true. That work almost never comes from comfort. It comes from someone who had something unresolved inside them and didn't look away from it. The difficulty wasn't despite the work, it became the work. Think about the person you know with genuine wisdom, not information, but the kind of understanding that only comes from having been broken by something and rebuilt differently. You don't develop that in easy years. Nietzsche writes that for the creator to appear, suffering itself is needed in much transformation. Not suffering as punishment, suffering as the condition under which something real becomes possible. This is what the waiting robs you of, not just time. It robs you of the transformation that was available inside the difficulty you were trying to outlast. Which means the logic of waiting, I'll live fully once things get easier, is exactly backwards. The life you're waiting to live requires exactly the person you would have become by living fully now, inside the difficulty, not after it. Part 4, The Heaviest Question Ever Asked Nietzsche. Designed a thought experiment so heavy that if you let it actually land, it doesn't leave you. Imagine a demon appears to you in your loneliest moment and says the life you are living right now. Every detail, every joy, every frustration, every ordinary Tuesday, every moment of waiting, you will have to live again, infinitely, exactly as it is. Nothing changes. The same sequence, the same choices, the same days, repeated without end. Nietzsche called this the eternal return, the heaviest weight, not because it's literally true, but because of what your reaction to it reveals. If that demon appeared tonight, what would you feel? Would you collapse, suddenly aware of how much of your life you've spent waiting, postponing, surviving instead of inhabiting? Or would you feel what Nietzsche described as the only adequate response, that you have lived or are living in a way you would choose again? Most people, if they're honest, would feel the collapse first. Because when you strip away the future, the version of life that's coming when things get easier, the someday that makes the now tolerable, what remains is simply this: what you're actually doing with your days. The question lands on your life like a verdict, and a life built on waiting fails that verdict completely. Because you cannot say yes to a life you were never fully present for. This is not designed to crush you. It's designed to make the cost of waiting suddenly, viscerally real, not as some abstract future regret, but as something you can feel right now about the days you're currently living. Part 5, Amor, Fati. The hardest thing Nietzsche ever said in The Gay Science. Nietzsche wrote something that sounds simple until you understand what it costs. I want to learn more and more to see what is necessary in things as beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love from now on. Love your fate, not tolerate it, not endure it, love it. To practice Amor Fati is not to pretend your circumstances are good when they aren't. It's not gratitude journaling. It's not reframing difficulty as a hidden blessing. It is something much harder and more honest than any of that. It is the active choice to stop treating your life as a problem to be solved before it can be lived. And most people relate to their own existence in a fundamentally adversarial way. There's the life they have and the life they want. And the distance between those two things must be closed before real living can begin. The gap is the enemy. The difficulty is the reason to wait. Amor Fati says, the gap is the life. The difficulty is not blocking your existence. It is your existence. And the moment you stop fighting that and start working with it, something shifts that no change in external circumstances could have produced. Here's what this looks like in practice. You identify the one thing you have been postponing, the project, the conversation, the creative work, the change, and you begin the smallest possible version of it today, not the version you'd begin if conditions were ideal. The version that is available right now inside your actual life with everything that's currently in the way, still in the way. You use what's hard as material, not as excuse. The financial pressure, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, these are not reasons to wait. They are the specific conditions inside which something real can be built. What is created under resistance carries a depth that comfort cannot produce. And you stop saying one day and give it a date, a real one, not when things settle, a specific point in time by which you will have taken a specific action. The open-ended someday is how waiting sustains itself indefinitely. A date collapses it into something you are either doing or consciously choosing not to do. Amor Fati is the decision to say yes to your life as it actually is, to look at the difficult, the imperfection, the uncertainty, and choose it. Choose to create inside it, choose to be fully present inside it right now, without waiting for it to become something easier first. That decision doesn't require your circumstances to change. It only requires you to stop waiting for them to. You are going to die, not as a concept, as a fact that is operating on your life right now, whether you look at it or not. The number of days you have is finite, and the days you spend waiting, genuinely suspended, living the provisional version of your own existence, those days do not pause the count, they spend it. The waiting feels like preservation, like you're holding something in reserve until the right moment arrives, but you are not holding anything in reserve. You are spending your life. Picture yourself at the end, not in some distant theoretical future, as close and real as you can make it, looking back at the years you had, not the years you planned to have once things got easier. The years you actually lived, and the question isn't whether you were happy or successful or comfortable. The question is whether you were there, whether you showed up fully in the life you had, or whether you spent it waiting for a different one. Nietzsche's Amor Fati was never about passive acceptance. It was about the radical refusal to squander the existence you have been given by holding it hostage to conditions that will never fully arrive. The person who lives by it does not have fewer problems. They are not more comfortable, more certain, more ready. They have simply made one decision that this life, the actual one, the difficult and unfinished and uncertain one, is the one they are going to inhabit completely. Now, so here's what you do, not eventually, today. Identify the one thing you have been waiting to do until life gets easier. The one thing you already know, if you're honest, you are using your circumstances to avoid. And take the first step that is genuinely available to you today, not the ideal step. The real one, the small one, the one that exists inside your actual life right now. The life you are waiting for is not coming. The life you have is already happening. The only question Nietzsche ever really asked, the one that cuts beneath every other question, is whether you are going to say yes to it. Drop a comment right now telling me the one thing you've been waiting to start, not what you plan to do eventually, what you're going to do today. And subscribe, because what's coming next continues exactly where this leaves off.